Hey everyone, happy September. September is here. I'm already wearing a turtleneck, and maybe that's a sign that, like you, I really miss being in those ice cold hockey rinks. Today I'd like to welcome you to our first OHL Prospect Primer, where we'll be speaking with a series of NHL Draft insiders on the top 2020 NHL Draft eligible talent coming out of the Ontario Hockey League. We're going to feature 5 insiders from various publications, and each will be honing in on a different position. But today, to kick things off, we have Sportsnet's Sam Cosentino here to give us a breakdown of the top-ranked eligible left wingers coming out of the OHL. Sam, happy September. How are you?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks. Looking forward to getting things rolling here. Hopefully everyone can stay safe and we can get back to playing some CHL hockey. So really looking forward to it. And, you know, in the meantime, it's a nice diversion, but the NHL draft coming up in October there should be a lot of fun too, especially with all the talent right across the CHL, but specifically in the Ontario Hockey League.
Undoubtedly a strong year for OHL talent heading into what has certainly been a stranger than usual NHL draft year. But with a tentative date set for early October, the countdown is officially on for these guys that you've certainly been able to watch over the past couple seasons. We're really happy to have you here to speak to these highly touted skaters during what is surely a very exciting time for all of them. To get things rolling, we'll start with Mr. Will Cuylle. One of 2 highly regarded prospects coming out of Windsor, straight ahead player, plays a physical game, has a strong shot, and standing at 6'3". Maybe you could speak to how he uses that size to his advantage.
Yeah, a great skater with good size. That's a really unique combination. So when I'm looking at Will Cuylle, he has an opportunity maybe physically to do things that others don't have the opportunity to do. And especially at the Ontario Hockey League level, where you're playing against younger players and players who tend to be, a lot smaller than you are, you can really kind of have your way, if you will, whenever you're out on the ice. I think for Will, it's just finding his way and finding out exactly what he is. 26 goals as a 16-year-old, backed that up with 22 goals this year, showed some inconsistency in his play. But I really think that size that you've talked about is something that he needs to key off. In order for him to produce at a consistent level and at a high level, I think his production really keys off the physical game. And what does that mean? I think engaging himself early into a game. I think using that big body to intimidate opponents in terms of scaring them and having them aware when he's out on the ice, net front presence, winning board battles, working hard in the corners, and being a force either with that great shot, off the side in the power play, playing the half wall, or of course with that net front presence. So he has the ability to use the size in a number of ways. I think for Will, he's still establishing how he can do that on a consistent basis.
I mean, had a good start, had a strong season as a 16-year-old player, 26 goals and 41 points last season, then 42 points in 62 games this past season, sorry. He's earned more ice time and in what's a super important year for him. Maybe you could speak to what's impressed you most about his progression as a player and whether or not you feel he's really asserted himself as that legitimate power forward prospect.
Well, I still look at this guy as a raw prospect. I think there's a lot of polishing still to be done here. And again, for me, it starts with what in Will's mind does he think he's going to be at the next level? And of course, when you're an NHL scout, you are enticed by the size, you're enticed by the skating ability, but at times you're wondering, okay, is he just going to be a power forward who we can use as an energy guy who's going to play towards the bottom half of my lineup? Or is he a guy with that great shooting ability that we project to be in that top 6? And I think he's created a lot of interest and a lot of talk among scouts as to which player he's going to be. Obviously, if you project him to be higher up in your lineup, then you're going to feel that this is a player that's going to be worth taking much higher in the draft, and maybe not as much if you project him in the bottom half. But he's such a fun player to watch that he can do anything out there. His great skating ability allows him to be in first on the forecheck. It allows him with that great shot to be able to produce points. So where is he along that continuum? And I think when it comes to Will's game, if he can find consistency in playing that physical game, the points will come. And he can also be an effective player that if for whatever reason you're not producing or you're slumping or goals are hard to come by, that you still can have an impact in the game in another way outside of producing. So I think that's what we're looking at with Will Cuylle, him trying to establish an identity for himself, and NHL scouts trying to figure out what they project that to be for him.
You've compared him in the past to a player like Tom Wilson. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, at the junior level, here's a guy with size and skating ability that can intimidate the opposition because he's playing against smaller players who might be a little bit more slight. And so I think that element is key in terms of, hey, being able to win pucks and just kind of, establishing himself and really willing himself to be part of the play and around the puck at all times. And so when it comes to Will Cuylle and being that type of player, Tom Wilson is the guy I think of. I think when you think of Tom Wilson, yeah, a little bit more brawn, came up even in the Ontario Hockey League when fighting was a little bit more prevalent. That's something that he's carried forward, obviously, to the Washington Capitals and defending his teammates. But moving it back to Will Cuylle, where we're playing in a game now where fighting isn't nearly as prevalent as what it used to be, now you can look at a player who can still establish himself by playing that big body power forward style of game. And so for Will Cuylle, I do think that there are comparisons definitely to Tom Wilson in terms of him being able to kind of establish his will on the game. But I also think of a guy like Nick Ritchie. And I think that comparison is also valid because good skater, good size, was able to produce at the junior level. And for Nick, he's still finding his way as to exactly what he is at the National Hockey League level. I think Will Cuylle is one of those guys that scouts are going to say, we don't want to miss that big body guy who skates so well. And does he have it in him to play with that meanness all the time like a Tom Wilson?
Well, speaking of strong skaters, let's switch gears to London's Antonio Stranges. Maybe you can talk about the type of game he plays and why he's such a threat on the ice.
Yeah, well, offensively, you have to think that this guy's a threat every time he touches the puck because he's such a dynamic skater. He uses that Jeremy Bracco 10-2 style of skating to try and deceive defenders. And while that tends to be a pretty good tactic to use at the junior level, maybe not quite as effective, although still a usable talent at the National Hockey League level. But here's a guy who's a little bit slight of frame, dynamic skating ability, shoots the puck well, and you have to be excited about his skating ability. Where it comes to Antonio Stranges is I think people are going to be somewhat disappointed when you look at his numbers. But if you look at the typical progression of what happens with a player in London, they come in as highly touted as Antonio was as a 16-year-old, and you're said, wait a second, you were one of those great minor midget stars who produced all the numbers and get all the big minutes. You're going to take a step back here. You're going to have to learn that we require you to play a defensive style of game and to be responsible defensively before you start to get the cookies in high leverage situations and able to produce offense. So he's now have completed year 2 of that experiment with the London Knights. And now I think he's starting to figure it out that he's got to be better away from the puck. He's got to be a better defender to allow him to use that great offensive ability, that creativity, that skating, the ability to finish. But oftentimes what's taught to those players coming up through the London system is, we want you to have the puck. We want you to go and chase the puck and get it back. We want you to play with it in the offensive zone. But that's not going to happen unless you play a detailed game defensively to try and get that puck back when you've lost it or when you don't have it. And I think Antonio's really started to learn that lesson, especially towards the end of the season, towards when we got to the pause. And I was really looking forward to watching him play in the playoffs and see what kind of damage he could do offensively with the London Knights. Now with another summer of getting to work out and a guy now who I think projects to be obviously a big minute guy with London next year. So it's going to be really fun to watch him make that progression. But I think people would be somewhat disappointed by the numbers. I think you have to look deeper into a player like Stranges to really appreciate what he could be and what he projects to be at the next level.
I know you've definitely praised his 10-2 skating style in the past.
When you look at that dynamic skating ability, it's the 10-2, obviously, the speed, that's another thing. But you want to have that escapability. And what does that mean? Being light on your feet, being able to avoid checks, slip off checks. I think of a guy like Mitch Marner and that escapability he has. He never seems to get hit cleanly, and that's why he's been such a durable guy at the National Hockey League level with the Toronto Maple Leafs, another former London Knight. So I think Antonio has that type of escapability, that lightness on his skates, if you will, to be able to deceive and make quick moves to get around players. I really like that about his game. And I think that's another enticing element that he brings to the table. It's not the fact that he can just do the 10 and 2, not the fact that he's a speedy skater, but the fact that he has some escapability and some deception in his skating.
All right, well, next up, let's chat Hayden Fowler, who was recently just traded to the Oshawa Generals from the Erie Otters. Firstly, why should Oshawa Generals fans, or maybe Eastern Conference fans in general, who perhaps don't see the Western players as much, why should they be excited about Hayden Fowler?
Couple of reasons. He's a responsible player. He's a veteran player. And the fact that he's already got some championship experience under his belt playing with the Erie Otters. So those are enticing things for me as to why the Oshawa Generals and their plans to host and obviously play in the Memorial Cup. That's what I think he was acquired to do, those things, to bring some stability, to bring some responsibility. I love the fact that he's got a two-way game, but don't sleep on his production as well. I think when given the opportunity in situations where he can produce points, that's not a problem for Hayden Fowler. But where he makes his mark is that great two-way game, the 200-foot game, the responsibility in his game. And that's what I really like about what he brings to the table. And, of course, I think when you look at, your 2002 born players, he's born September 24th, I think it was, 2001, which makes him one of the oldest players eligible for the draft this year.
Yeah, 2001 born skater with a late birthday, like you said. Kind of got off to a slower start due to some injury, but how has he been able to overcome that, really make a name for himself over the past 2 seasons, especially last year during, a very important year for him?
Yeah, well, no question. I mean, it's always difficult that you have a significant injury during the time of your development leading up to your draft year. So that's a challenge. And I think it was a broken collarbone, if I'm not mistaken, that limited him to 25 or 30 games in the 2018-19 season. That's such a key season for players when you look at, especially late birthday guys. You really want to establish yourself in that year. And you, being a late birthday, have the opportunity to play essentially an extra year and give scouts an extra year's worth of viewings of you. So that part faltered for him because of limited playing time due to the injury. But you have to like how he's responded. He's come back from that. He played on an Erie team that I think surprised some people this year, but a really hardworking, responsible type of guy. And, again, I like what Hayden Fowler brings to the table.
And what's one thing about him that makes him NHL ready?
Well, the responsibility in this game. And I think he's a player that if he's not producing, he can still have an impact in your lineup. And I say that a lot about players, that when you're looking, especially towards getting into the latter stages of the draft, you obviously don't have that one element that jumps off the page that makes you that first round player. And that's not taking anything away from the player. But as you move lower in the draft, you look for a more well-rounded player. And you're saying to yourself as an NHL scout, well, we know he's not going to come in and score 50. We know he's not going to come in and play on our first power play unit. But where I see value in this player is maybe in a third and fourth line role, where he can be an energy guy, he can be a checker, he can be out there in the last minute of a game, being ultimately responsible. He could play on your PK, and he's not going to hurt you in 5-on-5 situations. So it's going to allow you to put him out there, on a regular shift. And I think that's where players like Hayden Fowler really have that type of value is, while they're not going to be at the top of the score sheet, they're going to be players that are really important in a championship lineup that can play in 5-on-5 situations, probably your PK, and do some things that are really responsible. That's not going to hurt your team.
Awesome. Well, to wrap things off, let's touch base on one player to watch. In the Guelph Storms, Pavel Gogolev, 2018 NHL draft player, no NHL deal yet, but 45 goals, 96 points last season. He's certainly on the radar now. His numbers speak for themselves, but why does he deserve, in your opinion, a look from an NHL club right now?
Well, you can't help but look at the point production. Those are really, really amazing numbers. But when I look at Pavel's progression going back to when he played with the Peterborough Petes, I mean, he was simply a one-trick pony. And I think being traded over to Guelph, having the opportunity to play for a championship team, having the opportunity to play in a Memorial Cup with that championship team in Guelph really opened up his eyes to being exposed to players like Isaac Ratcliffe and Nick Suzuki and players who have great NHL aspirations. And what's common in those players is the fact that they're not one-trick ponies. You think about Nick Suzuki, he thinks the game at such a high level. He's able to create chances for himself because he's so aware. He's processing what's happening in neutral ice, being able to transition the puck with good skill and speed. Once he gets it and creates that turnover, he has the responsibility that when he plays in his own end, he's not going to be a guy who's going to give up a lot of goals. But when it comes to Nick Suzuki, he has the ability now, once he gets the puck, to be a real creative guy. And I think Pavel Gogolev definitely has some of those characteristics. Where he was lacking early in his career is, I think, the fact that they leaned on him in Peterborough just to be that one-trick pony. They needed scoring out of him. And I think as he moved along and he moved to Guelph and realized that, yeah, there's more to the game than just being able to score goals and to produce points. I have to be a guy who now is good away from the puck, who is responsible defensively. And again, and similarly talking about Antonio Stranges, the fact of the matter is, the better you are in those two areas, you'll have more opportunity as a result to play with the puck. And all those skilled guys, Sarah Jean, they want to play with the puck. And the fact is, you don't get it very easily. It's a difficult thing to acquire. Maybe at this level, being older now, being experienced, yeah, no problem. But when you project at the next level, it's not easy to get the puck. You don't have the puck for very long. You have to have an impact in the shift within 45 seconds. I think Pavel Gogolev has really realized that and understood that under George Burnett, playing in Guelph and playing with some really good players on the championship team.
I'm sure a lot of guys can attest to that big jump. But as always, we really appreciate your insight, Sam, and want to thank you for coming on for some NHL draft chat. Sincerely hope you've been keeping well during these tough times, and it's always a pleasure to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah Jean, for having me on, and best of luck to all the OHLers in the upcoming NHL draft.
Sportsnet's Sam Cosentino breaking down the top 2020 NHL draft eligible left wingers out of the Ontario Hockey League, and this has been OHL Prospect Primer.